So here we are, as an overview of the very last guide. This is also another user, StormSeekaz, on the EME forums that wrote a book about TERA. In here you'll find the S1 engine ini file described to the greatest detail. Every single line in that ini is described, is laid out, is defined, is explained exactly what it does. Some of them even explain if you change it to true or false and what that does to the game, what that does relating to the Unreal 3 engine. This guide is massive, and for anyone like me that's just curious what all of this stuff means, this is the guide to look in. And as we're scrolling down, every single thing, shadow resolutions, max multi-samples as examples, shadow fade resolution, everything here is described. And it's just, I went and read through most of this when I first found it, and it was just the coolest thing. I'm so thankful for this guy writing this because it finally satisfied my curiosity of how all of this works. And even when we get into anti-aliasing in this guide with Nvidia Inspector and some other options, there's even just huge descriptions of everything. Even the versus GPU versus CPUs and how bottlenecks happen in your computer, how they might be happening, even ways to improve that and examine that in game are all in here. Flaws and bugs with FPS in the game, it's just huge, and it's really worth a read at the end of all of this, just to educate yourself and to maybe even find other changes that you might want to apply or research. So then here we are at the anti-aliasing changes from the final guide. Here we have this same option I had earlier, 100 C5 Gears of War. This author seems to agree with the previous one that this is in fact the best option you can have. There are some other options with higher FPS, but there's some bad visual artifacts, glitches, or the FPS gets very low in certain instances and it's simply not worth it. This is also states that he uses 4 times anti-aliasing and 4 times super sample transparent anti-aliasing. Transparent anti-aliasing super sample here, so you can also turn this to 4x as well in order to mirror his settings if you wanted to do these same things. But I'm going to leave mine where it's at. This seems to work for me, and I'm going to leave it there. If you also see anything else in here that I've forgotten to cover that's different on yours, you might want to change yours to what I have here in order to help you improve even more, because there are some things I know that I changed that weren't on these guides, such as possibly texture filtering could be a little different, and some other things in ambient occlusion, which is what we're coming to next. But before we take in that, I want to talk about some multi-GPU SLI, as this author has also gone out of his way to give information for any SLI users. There is a setting up here, SLI compatibility bits, that you can change if you have an SLI GPU. If you don't know what SLI is, you probably don't have it and don't need to mess with those settings. But if you do have it, this might be a good read for you, as well as some extra information on how to enhance your SLI combination. The last piece of this guide is ambient occlusion, because our goal here is to use Nvidia's anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion to replace lighting enrichment in TERA, because lighting enrichment just looks terrible, and these two things together will give you the true lighting enrichment, which is anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion. And it'll also look way nicer, and the frame rate will be way better, because we'll offload more of that pressure onto your GPU, which can handle it. The first setting we'll want to change is ambient occlusion setting to performance, unless you want it high quality, but our goal here is FPS improvement, so we want performance. You'll also want to put this setting, ambient occlusion usage, at enabled. The author does say you can change it to this one that ends in 1, but I'm going to leave it at enabled because this seems to work for me and I don't want to change my settings. If there's anything else in here that's different, you can go ahead and change to that as well. My power management mode is to prefer maximum performance, and I only have a single display performance. I would suggest doing this if you only have a single display like myself, as well as these couple other settings down here. And I forgot to mention earlier that if we go into the Nvidia control panel, there is an option similar to this maximum pre-rendered frames. And in these other guides, you may read that other people changed this to 1, and that did help their FPS improvements. I don't quite remember exactly what this does, but for me, C3 seems to work just fine. But if you do want to try it for some extra improvement, you can go ahead and change this to 1, as well as your Nvidia control panel, changing the value in the TERA spot connection here, changing this to 1 as well, making those even, hit apply on here, etc. When you're in NVIDIA Inspector and you've made all these values, remember after these changes to hit apply. I always hit it twice just to make sure because I don't want to miss anything. And that's all the changes for NVIDIA Inspector, and you can go ahead and close this. And that's almost it. There's only a few more things we have to do, and we'll be done with every FPS improvement that I know.